Early February might not be the optimal time of year to trek out to the Pennsylvanian countryside. It's bound to be very cold. But how about we set out for Amish country? Now we'll have to leave our cell phones behind, and our laptops, our Netflix and our Disney Plus, our fancy cars, of course, and yeah, even our gourmet coffee. Okay, there's no need for us to go to Amish country. We don't have to hide out like a certain cop and his innocent young friend do. So we can continue to enjoy our phones, our TVs, and also our premium quality beans from Sparkplug Coffee. Their stuff lets you make the best coffee you've ever brewed, which is so much awesomer and cheaper than takeout. You're going to love the convenience of having packages delivered right to your door. Canadians and Americans get shipments sent within a week, and here in Canada, the delivery costs are zippo, zero, zilch, nothing. We hope you'll quickly find your new favorite, but that'll go easier if you join the Autopilot Coffee Club. Pause or cancel anytime. Go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and give it a try. That HYES promo code will get you a one-time 20% discount. Well, light's wasting and we have a barn to raise and a podcast to do. Gather the gang together and let's get to work. And action. Have you ever seen Witness? Well, good day, movie lovers, and welcome once again to Old Love Month here on Have You Ever Seen? This February, we're covering romantic movies that came out a coon's age ago, although this isn't as ancient as many of our other choices. We've been doing Love Month in a different theme, but always about love movies, romantic movies, in February for the past 3 years, maybe longer, maybe it's 4. I didn't look. I should have looked. And it's the 643rd episode on this podcasting channel, which is the place where we review classic movies and we spoil them. My handle is Ryan Ellis. My wife doesn't do the podcasting thing on Fridays, so I'll be in monologue mode on this fine February day. Let's get it going. India Amongst the Amish was released by Paramount Pictures one day shy of 40 years ago. Indy, Amish, not so dangerous. I'll go first. Anyway, this movie came out February 8th, 1985. This extravaganza did very well at the box office. It grossed more than 5 times what it cost to produce and made the 8th most money in 1985. We haven't covered very many films that came out that year, but one of them, and one of my all-time favorites, Back to the Future, was easily number 1 at the box. Rocky IV was 3rd. You can find a review that Chris and I did of that film on my defunct sports movie podcast, Scoring at the Movies. Our defunct, not just mine. I'll dig more into Witness's box office and the other numbers in a second, but first, I should lay out the plot. So Peter Weir directs an original screenplay by William Kelly and Earl and Pamela Wallace. Harrison Ford plays John Book, a Philadelphia detective who takes it upon himself to protect a young Amish boy named Samuel. The kid witnessed a brutal murder in the washroom at a train station while traveling with his mother, Rachel. Lukas Haas plays Samuel. Kelly McGillis plays Rachel. Things get worse when it becomes clear that the killers are cops, and this was a drug hit. So Book tells no one that he'll take Rachel and her son back home so they can all hide out in Amish country, where they'll never be found, ever, ever, ever. John is a fish out of the ocean, but he makes nice with his hosts. He is ready to make nice. Dixie Chicks, and even falls for Rachel, and vice versa. Until the crooked members of the Fuzz find out where they are. Then the showdown that's been brewing the whole movie finally happens. Showdown brewing. Or, in a nutshell, if you're going to grease a guy in a public washroom, just check all the stalls first, man. Be more thorough. Danny Glover, you're a bad cop in this movie, even though you're a great cop in Lethal Weapon. Danny Glover, of course, is one of the bad cops in this movie. I'll explain his credits and so on, and give his name later on. Okay, there's a wealth of facts and figures to discuss about Witness, which is a hit on Rotten Tomatoes. 93% of critics say they think it's worth watching. There are 42 fresh reviews and only 3 rotten ones. I'm recording this about a month before it goes up, so I guess that could change, but there you go, 42 and 3 fresh and rotten. And the average is 8.4 out of 10. The popcorn meter has it at 80%, respectable enough. Roger Ebert liked it so much that he ranked it 6th on his top 10 list that year. I don't have it in my top 10, looking at my old notes, but it'd be, 11th, 12th, 13th, something like that. This isn't Peter Weir's number 1 movie on Rotten Tomatoes, though. That is The Truman Show. Good call, guys. That tomfoolery is his best film. Witness is ranked 2nd, though, and it's only 1 percentage point behind Truman Show, so who knows, that could flip-flop a few times before I actually post this review. Weir's only splat on Rotten Tomatoes ever is Green Card, and even that is at 59%. so it's one tick away from making all the films that Weir directed fresh reviews on the Tomatoes. Pete's Cop drama opened second in early February that year, which was the 10th week of Beverly Hills Cop's hugely successful run. Those two movies continued to be number 1 and number 2 for a few more weeks, until Harrison Ford finally finished ahead of Eddie Murphy in early March. It wasn't until March 22nd, which was Beverly Hills Cop's 16th week of release, incidentally, that they both got knocked out of the top 2 spots, and out of the top 5, in fact. A bunch of new releases had come out by that point, I think is what it was. And since both of these fish-out-of-water cop movies were made by Paramount, the studio was competing against itself. And I'm sure they weren't complaining that they had the 2 biggest hits for so many weeks in a row. Witness won 2 Oscars for the original screenplay by William Kelly, Earl Wallace, and Pamela Wallace. Tom Noble's editing won 2. There were 6 other nominations: Best Picture, Best Director for Peter Weir, Harrison Ford was up for Best Actor, and the rest were in technical categories: the sets, John Seale's cinematography, and Maurice Jarre's music score. I should probably mention the people that were up for the sets: Oscar, art direction, set decoration, did they call it that back then? Production design was by Stan Jolly, and set decoration was by John Anderson. When the writers went up on stage to claim their trophies, both of the Wallaces shout-outed their son Christopher. Then Earl went up to the mic and said he was worried that his career might have just peaked. And I guess he was onto something because, while he wrote plenty of screenplays for TV movies in the next 15 years, and he worked on a few TV series too, he mostly didn't make movies after this. He was just a TV guy. Now, even though I think this is a very good screenplay, I'd say the scripts for Back to the Future, or even Woody Allen's The Purple Rose of Cairo, should have won. I'd go with Back to the Future, in fact. I'm biased. It's one of my favorite movies, and that is a fantastic screenplay. While the writers talked on Oscar night about their kids and about how their careers just peaked, Tom Noble wasn't even at the ceremony to accept his Oscar for the editing. Whoopi Goldberg was the presenter of the category, and she accepted on his behalf. She also said that Noble was off with Weir, shooting the Mosquito Coast. Ford wasn't there either, for the same reason. Harrison has presented at the Oscars lots of times in his career, including Best Picture, 3 times at least. But doing his job in a far-off land kept him from being there the one time they ever thought he was worthy of a nomination. He's got to get a Life Achievement Award at some point. Whoopi also made me truly LOL when she said she was sure that if Noble was there to accept, he would have thanked his mother, as some of us might have thanked ours. And she put it that way because she was up for Best Actress for playing Celie in The Color Purple that year. But she didn't win. I think she should have, but they went with Geraldine Page in The Trip to Bountiful. She should have been the first ever black woman to win Best Actress. That was, of course, infamously, Halle Berry. This ranked 82nd on the American Film Institute's Top 100 Passions. Ford's Working Girl was 91st, by the way. That's a pretty romantic movie, and he is great in that. The Amish Movie That Could went and got nominated for a bunch of other AFI compilations, too. The Top 100 Thrills. John Book was a candidate for the Top 50 Heroes. Sam Cooke's What a Wonderful World was up for the Top 100 Songs, and the film was a candidate for both the 1998 and 2007 AFI Top 100s, so the lists of the 100 greatest films of all time. That wasn't the strongest year in the history of film, and certainly not the strongest year ever in the history of the Oscars, so I'm impressed that it's been remembered so well for so long by things like the AFI. So now we know the many facts and figures about Witness. People thought it was great. Let's crack open the spine and see if they have a point. We open with white on black credits. Fittingly, for a film about the Amish, they're simple credits. Very plain. And hey, how about this? Alexander Goodenough of Die Hard fame gets the "and" credit. I guess based on his fame as a ballet dancer? It couldn't be for his reputation as an actor because he didn't play Carl in Die Hard for another 3 years. Anyway, our first proper visual is of the Amish people walking through tall grass out in a field. Weir doesn't do it as much as Gus Van Sant or Terrence Malick would in their films in the future. I guess Malick already had a few times in his films. But he likes showing nature just out doing nature things, like grass waving in the breeze. Everyone is gathering to mourn the loss of Rachel's husband, Jacob. This guy must have been pretty popular because they absolutely cram into that house for the service. Or maybe this is just what the Amish do for any of their own, gather in large numbers and pay their respects. Probably that. The Goodenough character, Daniel Hochleitner, says some nice words to Rachel after the service, setting up that he's next in line for her heart. Well, until Harry Ford comes along, but we'll get there. The story proper gets going when Jacob's father, Eli Lapp, along with Rachel and Samuel, horse and carriage their way into a nearby town. Rach and Sammy Boy are going to take the train to the fighting city of Philadelphia. Daniel shows up to see them off, and Goodenough shows off some pretty good range as an actor because as sinister as he would go on to be fighting John McClane, he's absolutely sunny and sweet in Witness. Eli gets to deliver a key line to Rachel before they go that we'll hear later when he says, "You be careful out there among them English." The English. Samuel and Rachel are taking this trip so they can go see her family in Baltimore. And that's their first mistake. Stay the heck away from Baltimore. I'm kidding. I have absolutely nothing against Baltimore. In fact, the very brief time Bev and I spent there was quite nice. We stopped there to get a picture of me outside the Orioles baseball park, Camden Yards. We were driving from New York to D.C. and made that pit stop, since the ballpark's so close to the highway. Would have liked to have seen more, but we had to get going to D.C. But while waiting around in the train station, Samuel's gotta pay, and this will give us our key scene and witness when the kid happens to see a couple of big scary guys murder what turns out to be an undercover cop in the washroom. One of the two guys is a pre-lethal weapon, Danny Glover. He plays McPhee, who cuts the detective's throat after his partner Fergie had draped a hood over the victim's face. Angus McInnes plays Fergal Rama. And I'm going to tell you now what the laps will learn in a few minutes, that these two killers are also cops. I guess I said that in the intro, didn't I? They just don't happen to be the brightest guys on the force, though, because, as my nutshell talked about, they didn't check all the stalls before offering the copper. I think it's possible that Fergie jumped the gun when McPhee wasn't quite ready for the attack to go down. He was in the middle of peeing, or pretending to pee at least. He does have a look on his face when it's happening, when Fergie puts the hood over the guy's face, almost like, oh, what's happening now? I better get to it. McPhee starts kicking in doors and almost finds Samuel in the end stall, but the little fella ducks low and sneaks into the second-to-last stall just as the killer breaks down that last door. Sammy even manages to be quiet enough to climb onto the toilet without being heard doing that, or seen by Fergie, who might be going through the cop's pockets, I guess. As tense as this scene is, it's also contrived, and it makes McPhee and Fergie look like idiots for how sloppy this execution was. Although if they did find Samuel in that bathroom, then we'd have no mover. We're about 15 minutes into the film at this point, and here's our first glimpse of Harrison Ford. I love, by the way, that the one-sheet poster advertises this as Harrison Ford is John Book, which would have meant nothing to people before they saw the movie. Yeah, the huge star that he was, he's in this movie, and his face is all over the poster. That's great. But who the hockey sticks is John Book, to make it seem like people should be saying to themselves, oh, Ford gets to play him? Anyway, Book questions Samuel about who he saw do the deed. He never got a good look at the white cop, just the tall black one. Sure, kid, all you see is race and height, and the fact that this guy viciously killed someone, no matter what his skin tint is. The laps end up in the back of Book's car, which makes Rachel angry because she wants nothing to do with the English and their crazy wild. Although, sorry lady, witnesses to homicides don't get to hide behind lifestyle choices and religious beliefs. Well, not unless you're rich. Then you can hide behind anything. Book and his partner Carter, the Brent Jennings character, drive Samo and Rachy Rach to a bar, and the cops forcibly bring a tall black guy outside, who I guess is supposed to be a usual suspect. Round up the usual suspects. But he isn't our man. Sure, this isn't a good look in the 2020s to go accusing a black man of being a killer just because he's black, but this kid knows the knifer was black, and if Book could be accused of being a typically racist police officer, well, at least he's going to evolve during this experience. Since they can't let Samuel go off to Baltimore with his mother until he identifies their killer, Book decides to take the laps to his sister's house, put them in a hotel for the night, and they just leave. Patti LuPone's name came up on our Eyes Wide Shut podcast a few months ago. Listen to that one to find out the bizarre reason why. And here she is, as Elaine, John's sister. She isn't very impressed with this arrangement, but she doesn't push back too hard on her domineering brother. She lets them stay there for one thing. I guess the night went fine because we next see the following morning, with Book taking the two Amish visitors to the police lineup. More usual suspects are put up against the wall, but none of them is too old for this spit. So the search continues. Lunch is hot dogs at a fast food stand, and I was surprised that Rachel was okay with this. I don't know what the Amish's diet typically is. I think they eat meat at least. And the circumstances they're in are unusual. Book is in charge of this whole thing for one thing, including their lunch decisions. But I would think pig hooves would be anathema to the Amish. But this is obviously just what Book eats, so here we are. Rachel rats out Elaine and tells John that his sister ranted about him the night before. For one thing, she sneers about how he tries to play father to her kids. But he doesn't really want to be a father himself. Ooh, setting up for things later in the story. And he also has a lot of contempt for his fellow policeman officers. He doesn't even know yet just how much contempt he should have for some of them. Samuel and Book get to looking through files of possible suspects, and while John's distracted by a phone call, the kid wanders off and finds a picture of McPhee in the station's trophy case, because he's a cop who was once honored for a youth project. Samuel is frozen in fear, and his big beautiful eyes go very wide, which Book sees from his desk and comes over to find the kid doing what Ford himself does so often when he's acting, pointing right at McPhee's picture. And Book quickly puts a stop to the pointing because he knows the fact that it's a cop who killed one of their own is going to make this very tricky. But yeah, McPhee is a lieutenant in the narcotics division, and Book's research discovers that $22 million in drugs went missing after a raid a few years ago. It's something about black market speed and how McPhee has been selling property the cops seized to drug dealers. That's evil, but also pretty clever. You bust one guy, then sell his stuff to some other guy, because you've got access to the stuff in the police lockup. Publicly, you look good. You're cleaning up the streets. Then you get to dirty them all over again and make a huge profit off of it. So I'm not condoning it, but it's pretty smart. Book tells all this to his longtime friend, the chief of police, Paul Schaefer. Joseph Summer plays old Paul. No, this isn't David Letterman's Paul Schaefer. It's interesting the writers would name him that, actually, considering the band leader was well known in 1985, and this wasn't a based-on-reality movie where they had to go with the name of a person. They made all these names up. Maybe the Wallaces and Kelly saw Spinal Tap a lot the year before, and they were just big fans of the man who played Artie Fufkin. Anyway, Book tells this Paul Schaefer that the Lapps are staying with his sister, not knowing this is the last guy he should want to know where Samuel is holed up. Because we're about to find out that Paul is in on these drug deals too, and the cop whose throat was slashed was getting close to exposing all of them. In the parking garage at work that night, McPhee corners Book and tries to put a series of holes in him. This is a bold move by Schaefer, because if McPhee and Fergie don't put Book in the grave here, and they don't, then John's going to know who ordered this hit, because he only told his old boss, or I guess current boss, what he knows. McPhee managed to clip John in the side during the shootout, after making it to Elaine's and telling her that she has to tell anyone who asks that she never met Rachel or Samuel, and she has no idea why her brother borrowed her car. At least Book can trust his partner Carter, who disappears the lap file for him while John escapes to Amish country. And Elaine and Carter back up their boy because when Paul questions them, their mouths stay shut. I guess Book was only ever planning to leave Rachel and Samuel at their house and then get back to the city, because he leaves them with Eli, then starts to drive off, but passes out and runs the car into their great big bird feeder. Before that, he had told Rachel when she asked about Samuel testifying he won't have to because there won't be a trial, which makes you wonder what John's long-term plan was. He was trying to go back to Philly before he physically couldn't continue. But then what? He's going to go underground until this all works out, or maybe the rest of his life? If they find him, they'll torture him until he reveals where the kid is. He could try to go way above Paul's head and talk to the feds, I guess, but short of that, what can he do? When your boss is the bad guy, you're stuck between a great big rock and a very painful hard place. Speaking of pain, Book is in a lot of it. The Lapps team up to drag him into one of the bedrooms while they hide the car in the barn and do whatever they can to help him. Because he can't go to a hospital, he had told Rachel that a gunshot wound would be reported, and then Paul and McPhee would find him. They don't really have any doctors here in Amish country either. The guy that helps him out is an herbal type of guy. Hey, take this, put this in his tea. But the bullet did pass all the way through Book's side, so he didn't have to pull the bullet out at least. Rachel seems to spend every waking minute with the pointing man from Philly, even having to listen to him throwing around some F-bombs during his delirium. At one point, he's even staring off into the distance, and it looks like he's dead. But he's Harrison Ford, so he's not going to be out of the movie before it's even half over. Don't be so gullible, McFly. Paul calls the sergeant who works in Lancaster County and finds out details about the Amish that we need to know, too. That there are a lot of Lapps around there, and there are several other Amish regions apart from just this one. Plus, of course, the Amish don't have phones or electricity, so there's no easy way to contact them or look them up in the phone book. The elders come to see John as he's starting to recover, I guess just to establish that they know he's there and they have input about whether or not he can stay. Considering he's there to protect one of their own, and a child at that, I think they ought to cut him some slack. Plus, there is the difficult little fact that he can't really move to go home right now anyway. He'll tear open that hole in his side. Samuel finds John's gun that I assume Rachel put in a cupboard, and Ford gets to do two things. Yell at the kid to put down the heater, but also to show off his abs. Our man Harry has been going to the gym. Even though John takes all the bullets out and then says now it's okay for Samuel to hold it and look at it, Rachel comes around to discover this gun fondling, and she's pretty mad about it. Book knows she's right that he has to respect their ways, so he does something that not a lot of cops in movies or probably reality would do. He tells her to hide the weapon, and the bullets too. But before she does, Eli sits Samuel on his lap with the gun on the table and tells him that taking a life is wrong. Always, even when it's a loathsome CEO, and that even being soldiers in America's various wars over the years is not something the Amish were willing to do. Righteous cause maybe, but killing is killing. The atypical remedies the Amish used on Book work well enough to get him back on his feet, and he's determined to get to a phone, even though he's not really ready to be off running errands just yet. Now, if the movie had been made in the past 20 years, he would of course have a cell phone and wouldn't need to rely on Eli to take him to town to call civilization. But I wonder if this area would just be a dead spot. Would there be need for cell phone coverage in a big swath of land where no one even has so much as a 50-watt bulb? Since his clothes are still stained with blood, Rachel loans him some of Jacob's old duds, and I guess Mr. Jake was closer to my height than to Ford's because those pants are many inches too short for him. He gets his gun and ammo back. It's a cute touch that Rachel put the bullets in the flour can, and he heads to town with Eli. For once, it's the Anglish who gets stared at, as the Amish in town watch John make his phone call. He does stand out and look a little silly in those clothes, partly because they don't fit him. And that hat. Oh, that hat. While still convalescing, we get a montage of sorts, with Samuel showing Book how they get their water from the well, and then the two of them take a look at the corn silo, which will be a key plot point later on. Eli wants him to help out around the farm. If you can get around and do all these things, you can help out around the farm, right? So at 4:30 a.m., up our man gets to milk some cows. Well, it's not his choice. He's dead asleep when Eli shines a lantern in his face and shocks him into awakeness. These Amish love their headgear. Eli even makes John wear a special milking hat. He'd had the hat on, I guess, the scene before. Can you help out with the milking? Naturally, the city boy isn't good at this at first, but he does manage to eke out some of the cow's delicious white stuff, and also makes Eli laugh when he says he's never had his hands on a teat this big before. If finding that funny humanized Eli, and it did, so does him having a rolling office chair in the kitchen, which I guess really wasn't that weird for the Amish to have. It might look strange, but it wasn't, I guess. It isn't electrical, and it's fairly plain, so it's okay. Rachel often makes a big deal about the Amish having to be plain. Boas and Flava Flav's clock necklace are out. As for that office chair, I guess the old man has had it a while because he seems to be adept at rolling around the kitchen. He just zooms over to one side and zooms back again. I personally spend a lot of time in office chairs. I'm in one right now. But I have no need to roll around like this. For one thing, I'm on a carpet. It doesn't roll very well. So I was a little bit envious watching this scene. Wish I could roll around like that. We haven't seen Daniel in a while, but he returns to the movie by coming over to visit Rachel and sit with her on the porch swing. I remember thinking the first time I saw this movie that Weir was setting us up for John and Daniel to really hate each other. But the story never takes that turn. It is a love triangle because Daniel is courting Rachel at the same time that she and John are getting into each other in a big way. But they never do fight over her. In fact, the two guys are going to become friends pretty soon. Or at least friendly. Book does some carpentry, trying to fix the birdhouse that he crashed into the day he got there. And this is cute because Ford himself was making a living as a carpenter before his acting career finally took off in the 70s. So he was in his element, working the lathe. It's not even a rudimentary lathe. One of the most memorable scenes in Witness is right here, when Book is trying to get the car battery to work. And when he does get it going, the AFI-nominated song, "What a Wonderful World It Would Be," comes on the radio. This isn't, by the way, the version of Sam Cooke's song that you'll hear on Spotify, not the exact version. And I know that because I'm a fan of that tune and it plays on my phone a lot, and this just isn't the same thing. Similar, not the same. John and Rachel dance on the hay as he sings to her about not knowing much about biology or trigonometry. I don't either. She's charmed and having a great time dancing around with John until Eli interrupts, cheesed off because she's supposed to still be in mourning over Jacob. That is his son, after all. But he's also worried that the elders will shun her if she makes nice with this guy and not Daniel, or at least some other man in the community. She has verve, though, and tells him that she's no child. She can make her own choices. Even though Eli is normally pretty awesome and a stand-up guy, it's hard not to feel frustrated with him in this scene. But I suppose when you live in a community that follows the Bible so closely, plus the movie was made 40 years ago, the people are bound to be the type who think women better follow the rules, or else. We can frown on the way he handles this situation, but I'm guessing almost everyone else in their neighborhood, even the women, would say pretty much the same thing to Rachel the Rebel that Eli does. Meantime, back in Rocky's hometown, Schaefer tries to convince Carter to tell him where John is, but Book's partner won't squeal, and he's going to pay for being such a loyal friend. Another red-letter scene in this movie is when the men team up to raise a barn, but, oh hey, there is a mild conflict with the two guys here because after Book says his wound is basically healed, Daniel replies, "Good, then you can go home," and assertively claps him on the shoulder. That feels like at least a mild threat, a stay away from my girl type thing. Hey, Viggo Mortensen gets some screen time here, and he doesn't get very much beyond this. Viggo would go on to be the king of Gondor not even 20 years later, but here he's just a glorified extra because Weir cut out so much of his performance. And yet Mr. Mortensen apparently enjoyed working on this film, even if he was disappointed that he couldn't show off to his friends and family that he was a big part of the Amish movie. Although I'll tell you, I couldn't take my eyes off the guy in this scene, and then again when he appears at the end. He's a magnetic dude. My friends, you bow to no one. The tension between Johnny and Danny I just mentioned wasn't meant to be too serious, I guess, because they're always side by side while this barn is being built, and Daniel even shares a glass of lemonade with John. Backwash! Ugh. And while the menfolk are wrapped up constructing a home for the livestock, not the livestock, George, the womenfolk prepare a great big lunch. Through all this, Rachel and the Englishman Book often make moony eyes at each other, and everyone notices. Woo! I guess it's later that night when John sits by himself on the porch swing during a thunderstorm, watching Rachel mill about in the kitchen, although him watching her give herself a sponge bath later on is far more erotic than him gazing while she scrubs the cutlery. She has her back to him when he appears in the doorway, but the Rachmeister turns to show off her naked upper half, which is about as much of a green light as it gets around here. It would be even back in Philly. But he looks away, not wanting to cross a line with her when he knows he can't stay there forever, the way he'd have to if they enjoyed some bedroom time together. That's his point of view, not even hers. I'm sure she agrees, but he's the one that says if we'd made love, I'd have to stay. They all go to town again, and Book learns after trying to reach Carter that his partner is dead, supposedly killed in the line of duty, which he and we know is utter bullpucky. Schaefer either flat out murdered him, or he made sure he was greased on the job. So John calls his old friend Paul at home, where they can't trace the call, and threatens to kill the chief for what he did to Carter. I said that he mumbled F-bombs when he was recovering from the bullet wound. Now he growls a lot of them at Paul. I'm not going to swear in this episode, it'll be a G-rated episode, but there is quite a bit of swearing in this movie. Some doofuses in town pick the wrong day to mess with the Amish, though, because John's in the mood to get out some aggression after that call. After a local twit tries to humiliate Daniel by smearing ice cream on his face, knowing he won't fight back, Book steps in and just beats up the bullies. Before Book left the carriage to do this, Eli tried to tell him that it's not their way to use their fists, but it's my way. My way or the highway. What's it going to be, Mr. Lapp? Trouble is, this retaliation is not only something Eli doesn't want him to do, but it's going to get them noticed by the townies, and therefore found by Schaefer and his hit squad. This is a well-written scene, though, because first, you have to feel good that the hero of the movie stands up for people who won't fight back against this kind of mean-spirited crap, and people who are becoming his friends, too. But when you need to lay low, or things could get deadly, they would get deadly, drawing attention is the last thing you should do. So it's heroic, but it's stupid. That night, after seeing John and Eli put the fixed birdhouse back on its pole, Rachel intuits that Book is going to leave the next day, which Eli confirms, saying the man needs to go back to his world. And they all knew this had to happen, even her. Well, according to Eli, she had to be hoping the strapping man from the big city wanted to be the new Jacob. But in a movie filled with meaningful looks, Rachel keeps looking at John as he finishes securing the birdhouse's pole in its hole, and maybe she doesn't agree that him going home has to happen because she takes off her bonnet and leaves it on the kitchen table. In the Amish world, I guess this means she can now be courted. She kept wearing it all this time out of respect for Jacob, but that's over now. I'm so fascinated by Rachel and Jacob as a couple. Were they actually good together? They had a kid, yes, and they lived in that house, but were they actually happy together? She heads outside and runs to him, and they kiss passionately. If McGillis and Ford's better halves at the time were worried that they were getting it on during this production, off camera, I wouldn't blame them. This is some passionate necking. They really sell how much they want to get to bumping. I don't think they did, though, the characters at least, because Ford had said that if they made love, he'd have to stay, and he doesn't stay at the end of the movie, so I don't think they did anything here. But we're not at the end just yet. Along come the bad guys the very next morning. That Lancaster County Sarge that Paul spoke to earlier found out where Book and Samuel are after that incident in town. Paul's thugs load up some shotguns and they, for some reason, leave their car quite a ways away. Well, I guess it went the element of surprise, and the car's engine would be hurt if they got particularly close. The badge-wearing drug dealers barge into Eli's house and scare Rachel. Then McPhee slaps Eli across the face as he's bringing a few buckets of milk into the house. Book! Wham! Samuel happens to be in the barn with Book, who orders him to run up the back and sprint for Daniel's farm. Before he goes, the kid points out that John Book doesn't have his gun on him, so he's going to have to fight off 3 guys without any firepower. And of course, his sister's stupid car won't start. I guess playing Sam Cooke songs and wearing down the battery was a bad idea, John. The white goon, Fergie, hears the attempts to get the car to turn over, and he rushes in to blast his shotgun at nothing. Book had booked out of there. The sound of it makes Samuel do the worst possible thing, though. Come back. John climbs up the ladder in the corn silo and looks to be cornered by our bad man Ferg, only he can't see Book because, from below, all there is darkness. It's actually a great moment of tension because it looks like Book is dead to rights, but it also makes sense why he isn't. Hello, darkness, my old friend. Fergie steps inside the silo to get a better look, and Book takes that opportunity to pull the lever and dump all the corn on him, which doesn't bury Fergie so much as choke him out. I guess the Fergster just can't catch a breath through the onslaught, although the actor who did the stunt himself did have access to a hidden breathing apparatus. And he's become one with the corn. He's a child of the corn. But yep, that Samuel is a putz, because he shows up back in the house, although at least Schaefer can't see him. Rachel and Eli can, but the angle is such that Schaefer can't. Meanwhile, back in the corn pile, Book desperately digs for Fergie's shotgun and manages to pry it up, then squeezes back out of the silo just as McPhee rushes into the barn, and Mr. Slashy gets shot right in the chest by our hero cop, and Danny Glover's dead. Samuel rings the dinner bell to alert the other Amish while Paul puts a gun to Rachel's head and forces John to drop the shotgun. And the idea Eli had to get Sam to ring that bell does work, because dozens of friends in hats rush over to the Lapp farm. Look at all those witnesses! Book yells at his former friend that he's not going to be able to shoot everybody there, so it's over, enough! And the chief knows when he's cooked, so he lets John take his guns away, and he collapses to the ground. All this yelling and pointing, of course Ford's always pointing, was quite a gamble on John's part. If Paul was so determined to clean up this mess that he might just start shooting Book, the kid, Rachel, Eli, everyone would probably scatter, and he could just drive off. He'd have to run away and hide in a country with no extradition, I guess, but he could have been that desperate. And then, yes, the kid and many others would be dead. So Book is taking a big gamble in how he handles the situation. The Fuzz show up to take Paul away, and I hope clean up the dead bodies and all that mess. The Amish shouldn't have to deal with all that blood. It's not their problem. Book's last moment with Samuel is to hug him and exchange some goodbyes. The kid never could call him John. As Book said earlier, it was always John Book, and it still is. It's a pretty sweet little moment. This is a love story between a man and a woman, but it's a love story between a man and a kid, too. The cop's last moment with Rachel, appropriate for this movie, is to just stare at each other. This is Meaningful Glances, the movie, after all. No words are spoken. I guess there was some dialogue here in the script, but Weir didn't think they needed it. He just let Harry and Kelly do it with their faces. And he made a good call. That's all they do need. Eli's final moment with John is pretty sweet. He says the exact same thing he said to Rachel at the beginning of the movie. You be careful out there among them English. Eli's parting words imply that John is now one of them. Either that or what he said to Rachel and now to John suggests neither of them truly belong there. Maybe he always had reservations about his daughter-in-law, and we know he has reservations about John Book. I choose to read it as sweet and friendly, that Eli is saying thank you in his own way, and that John is one of them. Maybe he could come back and help them raise another barn someday. But stay away from Rachel and go home before dark. The last moment for anyone in this movie is when Daniel is walking up the road to the Lap farm and gives a tip of the hat to John in the car as they pass each other. I guess Rachel will be a Hochleitner sometime in the future, even if she'd rather be a Rachel Book. I suppose if she were anybody else, other than a member of the Amish, or at least didn't have a son to raise, maybe she'd go off with the man from Philly and eat hot dogs in fast food joints the rest of her life. I just had a thought, too. What about the trauma the kid experienced seeing a death not that many days ago, and all they just saw, whatever this was, a few days before, maybe the day before, maybe that day, I don't know, with all the murders around them? But let's just move on. Rachel and Samuel and Eli, all you've seen and done, no big deal. Nobody does therapy, I'm sure, in Amish country. This is obviously not an entirely happy ending, since the two people in love don't end up together. Plus, Samuel has lost another father figure. But unhappy endings were typical for Weir. Look at Dead Poets Society and The Truman Show. Our main characters get heroic moments and make important connections with the people they care about. But in all three of these cases, those guys end up alone when the credits roll. In Witness, in Dead Poets, and in Truman Show. Okay, Truman's going to reconnect with Sylvia, but at the point when the movie ends, he's literally on his own. Although that dead poet lover, John Keating, can go off to find his lady love in England, now that he's been fired from the prep school, so that's a positive, I guess. But he was fired. But as for Truman, he's going to go off and try to adjust to a real world with someone he barely knows, whether he loves her or not. And John Book, well, his partner was murdered, and his police buddies turned out to be drug-dealing killers. Is that it? Just those three guys? Maybe not. There may be more that are going to be sleeper cells and get him next week. But at least he's a better person after spending time out in the country with the folk who like it plain. Although where does this leave Rachel? She lost her husband at the start of the movie. Presumably she loved him. Maybe she didn't, but he was her husband. It's hard to know if she ever does or ever will truly love Daniel. He's into her, we know that, but she was pushing back against Eli and the elders long before the end of the story. I don't think that was just because of her feelings for John. This woman just has rebellious tendencies. I'm not sure she really belongs here. But as for her love of the book, those feelings don't just go away, and it isn't impossible for them to be together. It's unlikely they can make it work, sure, because he's from Mercury and she's from Saturn. But whatever mourning she did for her husband is over. John is still out there. She knows he loves her as much as she loves him, and he really cares about her boy, too, and the boy cares back. But I guess what we have to believe in the end is, in film language, with Daniel walking down that road, she is going to marry him, even if she doesn't really want to. A little sweet, but definitely some bitter. As for the real Amish, not the actors, of course, but the actual people in Pennsylvania, did the filmmakers exploit them? That was a question that was raised online. People said they did even back in the 80s, and I'm sure they would see it that way in our very touchy times now. We'll have a theory about that. Making a movie about nearly any topic is exploiting it, and nobody could accuse Paramount of being in it just to educate the public about the Amish. The studio wanted to make money with a love story that happens to be an effective thriller, too. So yes, there's an element of using the people they depict just to make a profit-driven movie. I just argue that every movie does that in one way or another. So the cast, which includes no Amish people, by the way. They don't cotton to being photographed, so they weren't actors in this movie. Not even extras. Our main man, Harrison Ford, has been reviewed 10 times before today. In chronological order, they were American Graffiti, Star Wars, Apocalypse Now, The Empire Strikes Back, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Blade Runner, Return of the Jedi, Working Girl, The Fugitive, and Air Force One. That's not how we cover them, but that is the chronological order of when they were released. He also played Branch Rickey in 42, the Jackie Robinson biopic that Chris and I tackled on Scoring at the Movies. So that means we're up to 11 of his flicks on Have You Ever Seen, and 12 for me in total. He's catching up to Hanks. There haven't been all that many movies about the Amish, but speaking of Scoring at the Movies, there's a review about their kind on there. Because Chris and I talked about Kingpin in the very early days of that podcast, which was a lot of fun. I like that movie quite a bit. I think it's very funny. And it has a lot of the tropes we see in Witness, including a hilarious gross-out gag involving Woody Harrelson and a pail of milk. I said earlier that Ford has only ever been nominated for an Oscar for this performance. You know, for such a big star, has he really ever been in very many Best Picture nominees? Yeah, he's in The Conversation and Apocalypse Now, but he's not vital parts of either of them. They count as being in them, but he's not in any way hugely important. He's also something like the seventh lead in American Graffiti. He's pretty good in the movie. He's in a lot of it, but he's not one of the top 3 or 4 actors. But I was wrong in thinking he was only a cast member in about 4 or 5 candidates for Best Picture in total, because it's more like 8 or maybe 9. I think it's 9? One of those 2 numbers anyway. There's Conversation, Apocalypse Now, American Graffiti, Star Wars, Raiders, this, of course. Although the last time, can you guess when it was? It was The Fugitive, which came out 32 years ago, the last time he was in a Best Picture nominee. And I don't think he was ever in a winner. Was he? I don't think so. Maybe I'm forgetting something. But whether the Academy has ever seen fit to honor him or not, when we talk about who the all-time greatest movie stars are, Harrison Ford just has to be mentioned with Chaplin and Monroe and Brando and Cruise. Samuel L. Jackson and Stan Lee have been technically part of more overall box office successes than Ford has, but it's not by that much. And they aren't the stars of those films the way Ford usually has been. Stan Lee never was, in fact. He was just making cameos. Even Sam Jackson has more often than not been a supporting player in those films. He's in Avengers Endgame and Infinity War for that matter for a few minutes, seconds total. But look at how long Harry has been a headlining, first on the call sheet star. And he was in a slew of blockbusters for nearly 25 years straight, from Star Wars in 1977 until What Lies Beneath in 2000. There weren't too many duds for him in the 80s and 90s. Okay, Frantic, Regarding Henry, they probably weren't hits, and Mosquito Coast, I guess, for that matter. But look at the directors, though. He worked with Polanski and Frantic and Mike Nichols a few times, including Regarding Henry. So even when they weren't big blockbusters, and maybe those were bigger hits than I remember them being, he worked with impressive directors. Now, it's a different story in the 2000s and 2010s. He had plenty of wipeouts during those 20 years. But then after seeing his star really wane for a while there, he was such a key part of The Force Awakens in 2015, especially of the original 3 cast members. He's in that movie far more than Fisher and Hamill are. And that's still one of the biggest hits ever. And whether people like it or not, including our friend Carl, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull back in 2008 grossed $786 million worldwide. That was a monster hit. So even as an actor in his 60s, 70s, and now 80s, the man can put butts in seats. Not as much as he used to, but he still can. And now he's doing some of his most interesting work ever as the crusty psychiatrist on the Apple Plus show, Shrinking. Bev and I just finished season 2 a few days before I recorded this episode. It isn't a laugh riot, but we really enjoy it. Great cast, and he's one of the funniest parts of that cast. People also seem to like the Yellowstone prequel series 1923. I didn't see that, but I heard people thought it was good. He did that with Helen Mirren, I think playing his wife, who, connections, also played his wife in The Mosquito Coast. But while Ford has come up again and again on this channel, Kelly McGillis hasn't been talked about at all before now. And this was just her second movie, by the way. She was very new to filmmaking. She went on to be Tom Cruise's Lady Love the following year in Top Gun. I think she's pretty good in that. And then was Jodie Foster's lawyer in The Accused. It's not like she didn't keep working, but Kelly peaked in the 80s, making those 3 big titles in the span of just a few years. I shouldn't neglect to mention that she was also in The Babe in 1992, the one about baseball great Babe Ruth, a movie that Chris and I didn't like very much when we yapped about it on Scoring at the Movies. Lukas Haas was only about 8 years old when he played this kid who saw bad things in the bathroom. He went on to be in Lincoln for Ford's old buddy Spielberg, and The Revenant for Inarritu many years later, but he was also part of Nolan's Inception, which Bev and I reviewed back in July 2020. I tried to find a pronouncer for this guy's name. I think it might be Jan Rubisch. It looks like in some ways it's an accent on the E, but it's spelled Rubes, so I don't know. Jan Rubisch, whatever, is Eli Lap. He worked steadily into his 80s, often spending his days on TV screens. One of his movies, though, was D2 The Mighty Ducks, which Chris and I discussed a couple years ago on our Scoring at the Movies podcast. Jan, maybe it's Jan, I don't know, was also a talented tennis player in real life, and he was one of the top-ranked players in Canada at one time. He was born in Czechoslovakia, but he moved here not long before he turned 30, and I guess he lived up here for the rest of his life. Joseph Sommer is Paul Schaefer, without the CBS Orchestra. I just said that the man who played Eli in Witness was in the Mighty Ducks sequel. Well, the man who played Paul was Emilio Estevez's boss in the original Mighty Ducks. So yes, Chris and I talked about him in a podcast on that channel. As for Bev and I, we've wagged our gums about Sommer 3 times before now, in Dirty Harry, which was his debut, in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and then in Sophie's Choice, where he's the narrator, the voice of Stingo as an older man. Joseph is 90 now and still alive, but he hasn't been in anything in 15 years. Danny Glover is best known for playing Murtaugh in the Lethal Weapon franchise, but he was also the vicious Mister in The Color Purple the same year Witness came out. In fact, Witness and Color Purple competed for some of the same Oscars. This podcast has gotten into the Glover of it all a few times before today, because he was in the Royal Tenenbaums and Saw. That's an easy one to forget. He was in Saw, the original horror movie with Jigsaw. And scoring the movies will be mentioned yet again because he was the salty baseball manager in Angels in the Outfield, which Chris and I gabbed about in the very early days of our podcast in 2018. Brent Jennings plays Carter, Ford's doomed partner. He went on to be Ron Washington in Moneyball. CS, a Scoring the Movies podcast was done about that movie, where he was quite funny, especially in that scene where he and Brad Pitt recruit Scott Hatteberg to be their new first baseman. Playing first base is not that hard, Scott. Tell him, Wash. It's incredibly hard. Angus MacInnes is Fergie in Witness. He had been Gold Leader in the original Star Wars, plus he was in Force 10 from Navarone, both of which are, of course, Harrison Ford films. He also had roles in the 1975 Rollerball, a podcast you can find on Scoring at the Movies, plus he's in Eyes Wide Shut and Captain Phillips. 4 reviews of MacInnes movies are now on this channel. Who would have thought? Alexander Goodenough was, of course, the intimidating Carl in Die Hard, but he was only in a handful of other motion pictures. He was dead of hepatitis just 10 years after this came out, so he didn't have a chance to build much of a resume. He's pretty good in this, though. I liked him. Viggo Mortensen was making his film debut here, and other than Ford, he went on to have the biggest career out of all these people. We've made mention of Viggo 3 other times: Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, A History of Violence, and the one that somehow won Best Picture, Green Book. Patti LuPone plays Book's sister Elaine, the lady who recently played a witch in Agatha All Along on Disney+. Hasn't been part of any of our previous episodes, except her name did come up as a gag when we reviewed Eyes Wide Shut late last year. Their director was the Australian Peter Weir. He's had a distinguished career and he's still ticking, but he's like Joseph Sommer. No movies in 15 years. I assume Pete did what so few in show business actually ever do: retire. This is the guy who made Picnic at Hanging Rock, Gallipoli, Green Card, Fearless, and Master and Commander. I like some of those movies too, but you know a guy's talented when I only mention them at this point in the review. For many people, some of those are the masterpieces on his resume. I'm just a bigger fan of Truman Show especially, Dead Poet Society, and Witness. Weir's been nominated for 6 Oscars and never won one competitively, but they did give him an honorary award at the 2023 ceremony. 2 of the times he was up for Gold Naked Guys were for Dead Poet Society and The Truman Show, both of which have been talked about on this channel, of course, and he was nominated for directing this movie too. I bet he finished second that year to Sidney Pollack for Out of Africa. The movie won 2 major awards, editing and writing, so it stands to reason that it got a lot of votes in major categories like picture and director. I'd actually be extraordinarily curious to know where Ford finished, because it was William Hurt in Kiss of the Spider Woman, Nicholson was up for Pritzizan, or Charlie Bartana. Was Ford 3rd, 2nd, 4th, 5th? Where was he? Who knows? We know that the writers were Pamela and Earl Wallace, along with William Kelly. Pam only has story credit, but she did indeed share that Oscar with the guys. Despite the praise heaped on their screenplay, all 3 of them tended to work in television, like I said before, both before and after this. Now, William Kelly was at the end of his career. He wrote a TV movie the next year, and then he was done. He's like Weir and Sommer. He lived for a long time after his last movie, 17 years in his case, but no more credits. It just feels odd to me that you look at their resume and see that Hollywood didn't beat down their door to write other movie scripts, when this one did so well for everyone involved. Or if they did, these guys all said no. Their producer was Edward S. Feldman. He was in the chair when Weir made The Truman Show, but he also produced Six Pack, the Kenny Rogers car racing comedy Chris and I had fun talking about on Scoring at the Movies. I guess Feldman worked very hard to get a studio to make this, and most of them passed. Even when Ford was attached, they didn't see anything in the project. So kudos to Ed for managing to get a prestigious name like Weir to commit to it, and then convince the studio to greenlight it. John Seale was Weir's cinematographer. It's not his fault, but my DVD looks crappy. Once again, our TV exposed the flaws in an old DVD. TV. Anyway, cruddy print or not, Seal did a fine job here, working in the 1:8:5 aspect ratio. His credits include pretty great titles like Rain Man, Dead Poets Society, and The Talented Mr. Ripley. We've reviewed those three, and while we haven't discussed The English Patient, that's the one that won him an Oscar. As for the Oscar-winning cutter of this movie, Tom Noble, he went on to do an excellent job cutting Thelma and Louise, a film that came up on this channel many years ago. Maurice Jarre composed the music. He often worked with Weir, including on that Society of Dead Poets. Jarre took home Academy Awards for his music 3 times, including for Lawrence of Arabia, one of the most famous scores ever, and Dr. Zhivago. Fatal Attraction and Ghost are also on his resume, and all 5 of those movies I just mentioned are in our archives. So as I start to come to the end of this one-man chat, can a chat be one man only? I don't know. I'll say that this is an effective thriller. It doesn't have you constantly tied up in knots, no, but it's clear that at some point, Book is going to have a showdown with Schaefer and his goons. That inevitability looms over the whole movie, because you can only stay hidden for so long. That's a good idea for a movie, and it has some great tension, even though the story focuses more on the romance in the middle section. I think very effectively, and Weir balances those elements very well. I think Witness is quite good. I must like it. I've seen it probably 5 times. It's some of the most subtle work that Ford's ever done, and I put it on Weir's shortlist too. So that was how I saw Witness. I'll promote future episodes and tell you how to talk back to us in a minute, but I owe you 3 trivia questions first. I just spent all this time talking about Harrison Ford, so question number 1 is about his most famous franchise. Not including Rogue One or the animated Clone Wars or any of the spin-offs I'm probably forgetting right now. In how many of the 9 main storyline Star Wars movies does the word "the" appear? So, The Empire Strikes Back, The Empire Strikes Back. But how many other of the 9 Star Wars movies does "the" appear? Question number 2. When Gus Van Sant remade Psycho in 1998, who did he cast to play the Janet Leigh role, Marion Crane? And question number 3. After his big comeback in The Godfather, Marlon Brando went on to have a strong decade in the 70s. But just talking about 4 of his biggest 70s flicks, though, The Godfather, Last Tango in Paris, Superman, and Apocalypse Now, and how many of those movies does he die? So big spoiler alert when we get to the answers in about a minute. You're going to get another show on this channel on Monday, of course. Old Love Month will continue, and that episode will be leading into Valentine's Day on the Friday. So why not cover one of the most beloved romantic movies of all time, Love Story? Say sorry to me. Say it! Say sorry! As for when I'm podcasting alone again, that'll be in 2 weeks, when I see what's going on in The Postman Always Rings Twice. That's the 1946 Lana Turner John Garfield version, not the Nicholson Lang one in 81. Let me know what you thought of my words today. Did I use them well? My handle on Twix is @MovieFiend51, and on Blue Sky it's Ryan-Ellis. Bev goes by @BevEllisEllis on Twix, and she's just Bev Ellis on Blue Sky, no @. And you can email both of us at haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. We'd also love it so much if you would subscribe to our podcast, but also review it and toss up a 5-star rating. We also post our shows on YouTube. It's @HYES_Ellis when you're in the search bar on the tube. Comment on the show, hit the like button, and subscribe. And check out Sparkplug Coffee. You'll receive a 20% discount by using our HYES promo code. The website is sparkplug.coffee/HYES. As for the results of those trivia questions, here we go. Number 1. In how many of the 9 main storyline Star Wars movies does the word "the" appear? It's 8. Yeah, there's a "the" in all of them, except the one that started it all, Episode 5, A New Hope, not The New Hope. Question number 2. When Gus Van Sant remade Psycho in 1998, who did he cast to play Marion Crane? It was Anne Heche. It was a movie filled with talented character actors, but she was becoming a star back then, so she was given this choice role, until her apparent nuttiness and the fact that she dated Ellen DeGeneres made her persona non grata in the easily upset world of Hollywood. I feel like she was done dirty back then. And question number 3. After his big comeback in The Godfather, Marlon Brando went on to have a big decade in the 70s. But in just talking about 4 of his biggest 70s flicks, The Godfather, Last Tango in Paris, Superman, and Apocalypse Now, in how many of those pictures does he die? And I guess that required a spoiler alert, so maybe fast forward 10 seconds right now, or 15 seconds if you don't want to know the answer. Marlon kicks it in all 4 of them, just as he does in a few other 70s films that I can think of right now, but I won't mention those right now in case you ever want to check them out. So that'll do it for Witness. Thanks for listening to me in monologue mode today. Join us on Monday when we see what the big deal is about saying sorry in Love Story. Geez, we Canadians do it all the time. We're always sorry. Sorry. Meantime, I'm going to go hang out in a modest farm in the country, maybe milk some cows and look at a topless Kelly McGillis while she's bathing. I probably won't do the last one. not even the milking, and I lived in the country most of my youth. I'm not going back there. And cut.